I remember thinking, in the exact second my breath hitched and the world narrowed into shadows and noise, that no one was coming for me. That this was the kind of moment people talked about later if they survived it. Except I wasn't going to be one of them. I was just going to be another girl who disappeared between one bad decision and the next, and the rain didn't help. It never helps. It just made everything colder, louder, harder to see. Each drop hitting the pavement like a ticking clock I couldn't turn off, my sneakers slipping against wet concrete as I forced myself to keep moving. Even when my legs felt like they were made of something too heavy to lift, even when my lungs burned and every breath came out sharp and uneven. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant admitting how I got here. And I couldn't do that, not yet. Not when the night still felt unfinished and the air carried that strange pressure like something was about to break. I clutched my jacket tighter. Around me, soaked through, useless against the chill, my fingers trembling not just from the cold, but from the realization settling in deeper with every passing second. No cars slowing down, no footsteps behind me that sounded like help, no voices calling out my name, just silence stretched too thin between distant traffic and the hollow echo of my own heartbeat. And I remember glancing over my shoulder one last time, not because I expected to see anyone, but because hope has a way of lingering, even when it shouldn't, and all I saw was darkness, thick and unmoving, like the city had decided to look away. And that's when it hit me, the quiet kind of fear that doesn't scream but settles into your bones. This is it. This is how it ends, alone, unnoticed, just another story that never gets told. And I almost stopped then, almost let the exhaustion pull me down into the wet pavement beneath my feet. But something in me refused, something stubborn and fragile that whispered just one more step, just one more second, just don't give up yet. So I didn't. I kept going, even when my vision blurred and the streetlights smeared into streaks of gold through the rain, even when the cold seeped deeper into my skin and my hands curled into fists just to feel something solid. And then it happened. So suddenly I thought I imagined it at first, a low hum cutting through the storm, smooth and controlled, not like the distant rush of traffic, but something closer, something deliberate, headlights slicing through the darkness behind me, too bright, too steady, the kind of light that doesn't hesitate. I froze without meaning to, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, every instinct telling me to move, to run. But I couldn't, not when the car slowed. Not when it stopped just a few feet away, the engine idling like it was waiting, like it had chosen this exact moment, this exact place, and I felt it before I saw him. That shift in the air, that quiet weight of someone stepping into the space I thought was empty, the car door opening with a soft, precise sound that didn't belong to chaos, didn't belong to panic. And for the first time that night, my breath caught for a different reason, not fear exactly, not yet, but something sharper, something I couldn't name, as I turned slowly, heart still racing, and met the kind of presence that didn't need to speak to be understood. And in that moment, standing there soaked and shaking under the cold rain, I realized something I hadn't expected. Maybe I hadn't been as alone as I thought. Maybe someone had been watching long before I ever noticed. And somehow, that thought was more terrifying than the silence I had been running from. I should have run. That was my first thought, loud and clear in my head like a warning I ignored too many times before. But my feet stayed planted to the ground as if the rain had rooted me there, my fingers curling tighter around the edge of my jacket while the headlights dimmed just enough for me to finally see the outline of him. Tall, still, completely unmoved by the storm that had been swallowing me whole just seconds ago. And it was strange, because everything about him felt wrong for this moment, too composed, too deliberate, like he had stepped out of a different world and into mine without effort, his suit untouched by the chaos around us, dark fabric absorbing the light. Instead of reflecting it, his posture straight in a way that made the air feel tighter, controlled, like even the rain knew better than to fall too close. And when he looked at me, really looked, it was not the kind of glance strangers give each other on empty streets. It was focused, precise, as if he had already decided something about me long before I ever turned around. My throat tightened, and I forced myself to speak even though my voice came out thinner than I wanted. Asking who he was would have been the normal thing, the safe thing, but nothing about this felt normal or safe. So instead I said the only thing that made sense in my head. I said you should not be here. And the second the words left my mouth, I realized how ridiculous they sounded, because I was the one standing alone in the rain like I had nowhere else to go, not him. But he did not react the way I expected. No confusion, no irritation, just a slight tilt of his head, almost like he found something in my words worth considering. And then he spoke, his voice low, steady, cutting through the noise of the storm without needing to be loud. "You are freezing," he said, not a question, not even concern exactly, just a statement of fact. And for a moment I forgot to respond, because something about the way he said it made it feel like he was noticing more than just the obvious. Like he could see past the soaked jacket and trembling hands into everything I had been trying not to think about. I took a step back, without realizing it, my heels sliding slightly on the wet pavement, and his eyes followed the movement instantly. Not aggressive, not rushed, just aware, always aware. "You do not know me," I said quickly, the words coming out faster now, sharper, because distance suddenly felt important, necessary. But he did not move closer, did not close the space between us the way I expected someone like him might. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was, giving me room while somehow still holding my attention in place. "I know enough," he replied. And that was the moment something shifted, not outside, not in the rain or the empty street, but inside me, a quiet crack in the wall. I had been holding up all night, because those 3 words did not feel like a guess. They felt like certainty, like he had been there longer than I had noticed, like this meeting was not as accidental as I wanted it to be. My heart started racing again, but for a different reason now. Not just fear, but confusion. The kind that pulls you in even when every instinct tells you to walk away. And I realized then that the silence between us was no longer empty. It was waiting, and whatever came next was going to change everything, whether I wanted it to or not. The rain seemed quieter after that, not because it had stopped, but because my focus had narrowed completely onto him, onto the way he stood there like he belonged to a different version of the city, one I had only ever sensed but never seen. And I hated that my curiosity was stronger than my fear in that moment, hated that I found myself studying him instead of walking away, because everything about him said I should leave. The car behind him still idling, sleek and dark, the kind of car you do not question, the kind that does not park on empty streets unless it has a reason. And I realized then that he was the reason, not the rain, not coincidence, him. I swallowed hard and forced my voice steady again, asking what he meant when he said he knew enough. Because if I kept this as a conversation, then maybe I could control it. Maybe I could keep it from becoming something else, something I would not be able to step back from. But his answer did not come right away. Instead, he watched me for a second longer, his gaze moving briefly from my face to my hands, to the way they trembled no matter how tightly I held them still, and then back to my eyes like he was confirming something only he understood. "You have been running for 10 minutes, he said finally, calm, certain, like he had been counting, like he had been there for every second of it. And my breath caught, because he was right, exactly right. And I knew I had not said that out loud. "You took a left 2 blocks back." Instead of heading toward the main street, he continued, his tone unchanged, not accusing, not threatening, just stating facts that should have been mine alone. And suddenly the night felt smaller, tighter, like the space between us had shifted without either of us moving. I shook my head quickly, instinct kicking in. "That is not possible," I said, even though part of me already knew it was, because the certainty in his voice did not leave room for doubt. But he did not argue, did not push. Instead, he stepped slightly to the side, just enough for me to see past him toward the car, the back door already open. "Waiting, you should get in," he said. The words simple, direct, and that was when the fear came back, stronger this time because it had something real to hold on to. I took another step back, the distance between us widening, but not enough to make me feel safe. "I am not getting into a car with someone I do not know," I replied, the sentence rehearsed, something I had learned to say without hesitation. But again, he did not react the way I expected. No frustration, no insistence, just that same quiet control that made everything feel like it was already decided. "You are not safe out here," he said. And there it was, the shift, not in his tone but in the meaning behind his words, because it did not sound like a warning. It sounded like a conclusion, like he had already assessed the situation and reached an outcome I had not caught up to yet. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him I had handled worse, that I did not need help, But the words stayed stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat, because deep down I knew he was not wrong, and he knew that I knew. And that was the part that unsettled me the most. Not his presence, not the car, but the way he seemed to understand something about my situation without me explaining it. Like he had been watching long enough to fill in the gaps I was still trying to ignore. I hesitated, just for a second, and that second felt louder than anything else that had happened all night. Because it was the moment my certainty broke, the moment I realized I was no longer deciding whether to trust him, I was deciding whether I had any other choice. The silence stretched just long enough to feel like a decision being made without me, and I hated that I could feel it, hated that something in my chest had already started leaning toward him before my mind caught up, because everything I had learned told me to walk away, to stay in control, to never let a stranger decide what happened next. But control felt different out here, thinner, like it could slip through my fingers if I held it too tightly. I glanced past him again, toward the open door of the car, the interior dim but clean, untouched by the chaos around us. And for a second I imagined what it would feel like to sit inside, dry, still, removed from everything that had been chasing me all night. And that thought alone scared me more than the rain ever could, because it meant I was considering it, actually considering stepping into something I did not understand. I pulled my gaze back to him quickly, shaking my head as if that would reset everything. I said I can take care of myself. The words automatic, practiced, something I had repeated enough times to almost believe, but he did not challenge it, did not argue or dismiss me. Instead, he watched me the same way he had from the beginning, like he was waiting for me to realize something on my own, and that patience, that quiet certainty, made my confidence falter more than any pressure could have. "You have been doing that all night," he said, and there was no judgment in it, just observation, which somehow made it harder to ignore, because he was right. I had been taking care of myself, and it had led me here, alone, exhausted, standing in the rain with no clear way out. My jaw tightened as I tried to hold on to my resistance, but it felt weaker now, like it was built on something that had already started to crack. "I do not even know your name," I said, grasping for something solid, something that would make this situation feel more normal, more grounded. And for the first time there was a slight shift in his expression, not a smile, not exactly, but something softer around the edges, like he had been expecting that question. "Luca," he said, simple, direct, the name settling into the space between us like it belonged there. And I repeated it in my head without meaning to. Luca, trying to attach something familiar to it. But there was nothing, no context, no reference, just the weight of it. And then his eyes met mine again, steady, unwavering. And he added, "You can decide what to do next." And the way he said it made it clear that he meant it, that he was not going to force me, not going to close the distance or push me into the car. The choice was mine, completely mine, and that should have made it easier. It should have given me control back. But instead it made everything feel heavier, because now I had to own whatever happened next. I had to decide whether to stay in the storm or step into something unknown, and neither option felt safe. Neither felt certain. I looked down at my hands, still trembling, still cold, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to admit it quietly, just to myself. I was tired, not just physically, but of running, of guessing, of pretending I had everything under control when I clearly did not. And when I looked back up at him, something had changed, not in him, but in me, a small shift, almost invisible, but real enough that I could not ignore it anymore. Because standing there, between the rain and the open door behind him, I realized this was no longer about fear, it was about trust, and whether I was ready to take that step without knowing where it would lead. I do not remember deciding to move, not in a clear, confident way. It was quieter than that, more like something inside me shifted just enough to tip the balance, and suddenly my feet followed before my thoughts could catch up. One step forward, then another, the sound of water splashing softly beneath my shoes as I closed the distance between us. And the closer I got, the more real everything felt. The car, the open door, him standing there without rushing me, without reaching out, just watching with that same calm focus that made it impossible to tell what he was thinking. I stopped just short of the door, close enough to feel the faint warmth coming from inside, a sharp contrast to the cold that had settled deep into my skin. And for a second I hesitated again, my hand hovering slightly as if the air itself had weight. because stepping in meant more than getting out of the rain. It meant trusting a stranger whose presence felt too intentional to be coincidence. It meant admitting that I needed help even when I had spent so long convincing myself I did not. I glanced back at him, searching for something, anything that would make this feel less uncertain. But his expression had not changed, still composed, still unreadable. And somehow that steadiness made the decision clearer instead of harder, because he was not trying to convince me, not trying to sway me. He had already made his offer and left the rest to me. And that kind of control, that kind of restraint, was something I had not expected, something that made me pause for a different reason. "You can still walk away," he said quietly, and I knew he meant it, which only made everything more complicated, because now staying or leaving both felt like choices I would have to live with. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, the tension in my chest loosening just enough for clarity to slip through. And I understood then that I had already crossed the line the moment I stepped closer. This was just the final step, so I did it. I leaned forward and slipped into the car, the door closing behind me with a soft, solid sound that cut off the rain almost instantly. And the silence inside was so complete it felt unreal, like I had stepped into a different world entirely. Warm air wrapped around me, gentle but immediate, and I sat there for a second just breathing, letting my body catch up to what had just happened, my hands still shaking slightly as I pressed them against my knees, grounding myself in something physical. The faint scent of leather and something clean filled the space, steady, controlled, nothing like the chaos outside. And then the driver's door opened, followed by the quiet shift of movement as Luca took his seat, the engine adjusting almost imperceptibly as the car came fully to life. I turned my head slightly, watching him from the corner of my eye, trying to understand what I had just stepped into, but he did not look at me right away, his focus forward, hands resting lightly on the wheel as if everything was exactly as it should be. And that calm, that complete lack of urgency, made something inside me tighten again, because it felt like I had not just accepted help. I had entered a situation where the rules were already set, even if I did not know them yet. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice steadier now, but still carrying the weight of everything I had not said. And this time, he answered without hesitation. "Somewhere safe," he said, and the simplicity of it should have reassured me. But instead it raised more questions than it answered, because safe meant different things to different people, and I had no idea what it meant to him. The car began to move smoothly, pulling away from the curb and into the empty street, the rain fading into the background as we left that moment behind. But the feeling stayed with me, quiet and persistent, because as the city lights blurred past the window, I realized something I had not expected. I had chosen to trust him, even without understanding why, and that choice was already changing everything. The city looked different from inside the car. That was the first thing I noticed, not because it had changed, but because I had. The noise dulled to a distant hum. The rain reduced to faint streaks against the window instead of something pressing down on me. And I sat there trying to steady my breathing, trying to understand how everything had shifted so quickly from chaos to quiet, from running to sitting beside a man I barely knew, yet somehow trusted enough to follow without asking for proof. My fingers traced the edge of my sleeve absently, still damp, still cold, a reminder that this was real, that I had not imagined any of it. And for a while neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us but not uncomfortable, just present, like it was part of whatever this was, part of the space he controlled without effort. I glanced at him again, more directly this time, studying the way his posture never changed, the way his attention stayed on the road but never seemed distracted, as if he could sense everything around him without needing to look. And it made me wonder how long he had been like this, how long he had moved through the world with that same calm certainty while everything else kept shifting around him. "You said you knew enough," I finally said, my voice quieter now but steady, because if I had stepped into this then I needed to understand it. Even a little. His gaze flicked toward me briefly, just long enough for me to catch the intensity in it before it returned to the road, enough to know he had been waiting for that question. "You were not where you were supposed to be tonight," he said, and my chest tightened instantly, not because I had told him anything, but because he was right again, in a way that felt too specific to ignore. I looked away, toward the window, watching the blurred lights pass by as I tried to keep my expression neutral. "That does not explain how you found me," I replied, keeping my tone careful, measured. But inside something was shifting again, curiosity, mixing with unease in a way that made it impossible to separate the two. He exhaled slowly, not frustrated, just thoughtful, like he was deciding how much to say. And then he answered in the same calm voice he had used from the beginning. "I did not find you," he said, and I felt that sentence settle somewhere deeper than I expected, because of the way he said it, deliberate, intentional, like every word mattered. "I followed you," he added, and the simplicity of it should have made it clearer, but instead it opened more questions than it closed. I turned toward him fully now, my heart picking up pace again, not out of fear exactly, but something close to it. "Why?" I asked, the word coming out sharper than I intended, because that was the part that mattered, the part that made all of this either make sense or fall apart completely. He did not answer right away, and that pause felt heavier than anything he could have said, because it told me this was not random, this was not a coincidence. This was something he had chosen, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, but no less certain. "Because you were already in danger," he said, and I felt something inside me go still. Not panic, not denial, just a quiet realization that he had seen something I had been trying not to name, something I had been running from without fully understanding. And for the first time since I stepped into the car, I wondered if I had not just been saved from the rain, but from something far more complicated, something I was not ready to face alone. And as the car continued moving through the city, smooth and steady, I realized that whatever this was, whatever reason he had for being there tonight, it had started long before I ever noticed him, and I was only just beginning to catch up. His words stayed with me longer than I expected, not loud, not overwhelming, just present, like a quiet truth I could not push aside no matter how hard I tried. "Because you were already in danger," I repeated it in my head, testing it, searching for a way to dismiss it, but nothing came. No easy explanation, no simple denial, just a growing awareness that maybe I had been ignoring something obvious, something I did not want to name because naming it would make it real. I shifted slightly in my seat, the warmth of the car no longer enough to fully settle the unease building inside me. "What kind of danger?" I asked, my voice lower now, more careful, because this felt like a line I could not uncross once I stepped over it. And for a moment I thought he might not answer, the silence stretching again. But this time it felt different, heavier, like he was choosing his words with more precision. Like whatever he said next mattered more than everything before it. "People do not chase someone in the rain without a reason," he said finally, and my breath caught because the way he said it left no room for misunderstanding. He had seen it, not just guessed, not just assumed. He had seen me running, seen the way I moved, the way I looked back, the way fear had shaped every step I took. I looked down at my hands again, at the faint tremor still there, and I realized something I had been avoiding since the moment this night started. I had not just been running, I had been escaping, and there was a difference, one I could not ignore anymore. I did not answer right away, because what was I supposed to say? That he was wrong, that I had imagined everything, that I had not felt that pressure building behind me like something I could not outrun. None of that felt true. Not now. Not sitting here where everything was clearer and harder to deny. "You do not know anything about me," I said instead, the words softer than before, less defensive, more like a reminder to myself than a challenge to him. But he did not react, did not push back or correct me. He simply nodded once, acknowledging it without arguing. "You are right," he said, and that should have ended it. That should have given me space to breathe. But then he added quietly, "But I know enough to not leave you out there alone." And something in that sentence broke through the last layer of resistance I had been holding on to, because it was not about control, not about power, it was about choice, his choice, and the fact that he had made it without hesitation, without asking for anything. In return, I leaned back slightly, my head resting against the seat as I let that settle, the tension in my shoulders easing just a little, not gone, but different now, less sharp, less immediate. The city lights continued to pass by outside, reflections flickering across the glass in a steady rhythm. And for the first time since I stepped into the car, I allowed myself to stop questioning every second, just for a moment, just enough to breathe. "You could have left," I said after a while, the thought coming out before I could stop it, because it was true. He could have driven past, could have ignored what he saw, and continued on like nothing had happened. But he had not. He had stopped. He had stepped out into the rain. He had changed the direction of this night in a way I was only beginning to understand. His hands remained steady on the wheel, his focus still forward. But there was something in his voice when he answered that made me look at him again. I do not leave things unfinished, he said, and the words were simple, almost understated, but the meaning behind them was anything but, because it did not sound like a general statement. It sounded specific, intentional, like I was part of something he had already decided mattered. And that realization settled deep in my chest, quiet but undeniable, because in that moment I understood something I had not fully seen before. This was not just about helping me, not just about the situation I had been in. This was about him choosing to be there, choosing to stay, and whatever reason he had for that, whatever it meant, I was now part of it, whether I was ready or not. We drove for what felt like longer than it probably was, the rhythm of the road steady beneath us, each turn and stoplight blending into the next until the city outside no longer looked familiar, not in the way it had before, not in the way that let me pretend I still knew where I was going. And that realization settled quietly in the back of my mind. Not panic, not yet, just awareness. Because I had stepped into something that was no longer mine to control completely, and I could feel it in the way Luca moved through the streets without hesitation, like every turn had already been decided long before this night began. I watched the buildings change through the window, the crowded blocks fading into quieter ones, the lights fewer, softer, until the noise of the city thinned into something distant, something almost forgotten, and for a moment I wondered how far we had gone, not just in miles but in choices, because it felt like I had crossed more than just physical distance. I had crossed into a different version of my life without realizing it. The car slowed eventually, turning into a street lined with tall trees and wide sidewalks, the kind of place that did not belong to chance, the kind that felt protected without needing to say it out loud. And when we came to a stop in front of a building that rose quietly against the night, all clean lines and soft lighting, I felt my breath catch again, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what this meant. We had arrived somewhere intentional, somewhere chosen. And that made everything more real than it had been in motion. Luca turned off the engine with a smooth, practiced motion, the quiet that followed settling around us like a pause waiting to be filled. I did not move right away, my hand resting lightly against the door as I looked at the entrance ahead, trying to decide if stepping out would feel as final as stepping in had. You live here? I asked, not because I needed the answer, but because I needed to hear something. Anything that grounded this moment in something real. He glanced at me briefly, that same steady gaze meeting mine without hesitation. For now, he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made it clear this place was not just a home. It was a space he used when needed, a controlled environment. And that realization made my chest tighten slightly, because it reminded me again that I still did not fully understand who he was, or what world I had stepped into. The door unlocked with a soft click, the sound small but significant. And he stepped out first, moving around the car with the same quiet confidence he had shown all night, opening my door without rushing, without expectation, just offering, like everything else he had done. I hesitated for a second before taking his hand, not because I had to, but because I chose to. The warmth of his grip steady, grounding, as I stepped out into the cool air, the rain now reduced to a light drizzle that barely touched the ground, the streets silent around us. And for the first time since this began, I felt the absence of urgency, no rushing footsteps, no pressure building behind me, just stillness. And that stillness felt unfamiliar in a way I could not ignore. We stood there for a brief moment, facing the entrance, and I realized something I had not allowed myself to think about before. I was safe. Not in a way that erased everything else, not in a way that answered every question, but in this moment, in this place, I was not running anymore. And as Luca moved toward the door, pausing just long enough to glance back at me, as if confirming I would follow, I understood that whatever came next, whatever answers I was searching for, they were waiting on the other side of that door, and I was no longer the same person who had been standing alone in the rain, wondering if anyone would come. The door opened with a quiet precision that matched everything else about him. No hesitation, no unnecessary movement. Just a smooth transition from outside to inside, and I followed without thinking too hard about it because stopping now would have meant questioning everything all over again, and I was not sure I had the energy for that. The lobby was warm, softly lit, the kind of place where every detail felt intentional, polished floors reflecting the muted glow of overhead lights, the air carrying that faint, clean scent that made everything feel controlled, untouched, and I became suddenly aware of how out of place I must have looked. Damp clothes, hair still clinging to my face from the rain, hands not quite steady yet. But no one stared, no one questioned. It was as if my presence here had already been accounted for, and that thought settled quietly in my mind. Not alarming, but not entirely comforting either. Luca walked ahead with the same calm authority, not rushing, not slowing, just moving like he knew exactly where he was going, and expected the world to adjust around him. And without realizing it, I kept pace, matching his steps, staying just close enough to feel anchored, but not close enough to feel overwhelmed. We reached the elevator, and he pressed a button without looking, the doors opening almost instantly like they had been waiting, and for a brief second I hesitated again, my reflection catching in the mirrored surface, reminding me of where I had been less than an hour ago, standing in the rain, unsure if I would make it through the night without something going wrong. And now here I was, stepping into a space that felt like it belonged to someone who never had to question their next move. The doors closed behind us with a soft sound that echoed louder than it should have, sealing the moment in a way that felt final, and the silence inside the elevator was different from the car, more contained, more intimate. I could feel the shift in proximity, the awareness of him standing just a few feet away, and it made my thoughts sharper, more focused, because there were still questions, still things I did not understand. "You said you followed me," I said quietly, not looking at him right away, because saying it out loud made it more real, more difficult to ignore, and I needed to understand why that did not feel as threatening as it should have. There was a slight pause before he answered, not hesitation, just consideration, like he was choosing how much to reveal. I said I would not leave things unfinished, he replied, and when I looked at him this time, there was something different in his expression, not softer, not exactly, but clearer, like he was letting me see just enough to understand that this was not about chance, this was about intention. The elevator continued its steady ascent, each passing floor marked by a quiet tone that seemed louder than the last, counting something down or up. I could not tell, and I realized then that whatever this was, it was only just beginning, not ending, not resolving, just unfolding in a way I had not expected. "Why me?" I asked finally. The question that had been building since the moment he stepped out of that car. The question that mattered more than anything else, because it would determine everything that came next. He did not answer immediately, and for a second I thought he might not answer at all. But then he turned slightly, just enough for his gaze to meet mine fully, steady, certain, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried a weight that settled deep, because it was never just tonight, he said, and in that moment something shifted again, something deeper than fear or curiosity, because those words meant this was not random. This was not a single choice made in the rain. This was something that had been set in motion long before I ever noticed it. And as the elevator slowed and the doors prepared to open, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. I had not just been saved that night, I had been found.